Hello and welcome to Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, Alan Wyma, and today we have a special guest, Chris Sells, who is a product manager for Google. He manages quite a lot of different things in the Flutter project, so maybe easier if I let you kind of introduce that to people rather than me trying to remember all the details you gave to me. So go ahead.
Sure. Hi, Alan. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I am primarily responsible for the end-to-end developer experience for Flutter, and that encompasses a number of things. I do a lot of work with the ecosystem. I'm on the Flutter ecosystem committee that does the designation for Flutter favorites. I work a lot with our desktop support, so I'm responsible for Windows support and Mac OS support and Linux support. And of course, I work with our partners on Canonical to make sure we have great Linux support.
Oh, so you must have spent quite a bit of time with, I believe I had him on, it was Ken Van Dyne, I believe his name is.
Ken is my counterpart over on the Canonical.
Yeah, he was a great guest. He really gave a lot of information. And I was quite surprised about all the stuff that they brought back to the ecosystem.
Yeah, Ken's a great guest. And in fact, working with the whole Canonical team has been great. Those guys really know what they're doing.
Yeah, what kind of experience is it like working with those guys? Because, I mean, they're doing a very specific problem, right? I never would imagine creating a installer using Flutter. I mean, there's no reason why you cannot, right? Because it's still native, but it's just something that never came up in my mind before.
It is interesting. We have actually, one of the community members for the Flutter community has actually built a Flutter installer using Flutter and Flutter desktop. So essentially what he did was he built the Flutter installer, and then he built one for Mac and one for Windows and one for Linux. They all do installation. So in fact, the Canonical installer built in Flutter is not the first one I've seen. The installer built with Flutter. Of course, in general, when people build installers, they're kind of formulaic, right? I've got, a binary, maybe a bunch of binaries. I've got some configuration. I want to, drop it on the hard drive where the user says, maybe set up some configuration, right? That's pretty formulaic. And of course, there's toolkits for doing that. But that's not what Canonical is doing, right? I mean, Canonical is setting up a brand new machine with an entire operating system, right? So they really have to own the experience end to end. And we were pretty happy to see them choose Flutter for building it.
Yeah. What about actually, I'm kind of curious because I did play with Flutter desktop for Windows quite some time ago. One of the issues I had is just some random laptops that it just wouldn't work. I think at the time you had to actually include a bunch of DIL files, but is that all been solved since then? Where like you could just drop the single executable, or do you still have to include all those support libraries?
Oh, well, it is absolutely the case that we produce an XE. That XE requires some standard distribution DLLs, as well as if you're calling any SDKs or anything, native SDKs that require DLLs, that you need to bundle those as well. So yeah, we haven't done anything magical in terms of trying to bundle all the DLLs into a single XE because on Windows those DLLs could already be pre-installed. You could be building an installer that throws them into a Windows folder. I mean, we don't dictate any specific way you would install your app on Windows, and we want to give people choices. And of course, you can do it in several different ways on Windows. Essentially, what we do is we build the XE and we document the DLLs that you need to ship alongside, and then you get to choose how you want to do that.
Okay, I think makes sense, but I'm just thinking about like the nice part about Flutter is that it really works great for people who are new, right? Because it's so visual. I mean, if you think about traditional programming, right? I'm guessing you probably start off with something like C++ or something like that in the back in your yeah. So if you imagine like a newer developer nowadays who like is very visual, they can starting with C++, they really probably cannot see what it is that they're making, right? Or if they want to see it, it's going to take them quite some time. As opposed to Flutter, you just click the play button, you can see something immediately, and you can start changing colors and see all these changes immediately. Like,
and that's still the case, of course, when you're targeting Windows. And of course, it's not hard to bundle up the DLLs. We put them in the Redis directory for you and put things on a zip file and throw it up on a website if that's all you want to do in your distribution. But remember, we built Flutter to make the best possible apps you can build. So we don't only target, just because Flutter is easy doesn't mean we only target beginners, right? We target enterprise developers, professional developers, right? And developers that need that control of how they distribute their binaries, whether it's in the store, whether it's in an MSIX, whether it's in a zip file, however it is. We don't only target beginners. In fact, most of our desktop customers are enterprise.
Okay, that's interesting, but definitely makes sense. Actually, I'm kind of curious too, because I have heard some pushback from businesses saying like it's not ready and all these things, and also that maybe they feel like because it's so easy to use that it's not very good product to use. Like, what has been the feedback from enterprise customers?
You mean for Flutter in general or for Flutter Desktop?
I think Flutter in general is good to hear about.
Actually, I do not ever hear that. I talk to enterprise customers all week long who are excited about the productivity gains they get for having a single source code base, the productivity gains they get by using a modern UI framework, and they're excited about the native performance they get on the result. So that thing you said, I never hear. I hear the exact opposite.
That's good. You hear different things from different people, right? But I think also I hear that because out here, people are more, risk adverse. They want to do things that are more like traditional. Like the basic languages out here are like Java, Python, JavaScript, C++.
I'm curious. Are you on a desert island? When you say out here, what are we talking about? I don't know where you
are. I'm in Hong Kong, actually. So the mindset out here is very, I wouldn't say backwards, but it's definitely behind, I would say. So if you say Dart.
And of course, every region, every area, right? We have, a huge installed base for Flutter developers in China. Also huge in India, South America, obviously North America, right? We have a large set of regions, but of course not every region, not every company is at the same place in their technology adoption lifecycle, right? So, Flutter 1.0 was very much an early adopter kind of a deal. With Flutter 2.0, we're seeing it very much early mainstream, right? Where it's folks that want to take advantage of new technologies to help drive their business, but it's also seen as a mainstream technology, right? That it's no longer at risk of just falling apart and going away and blowing away in the wind. And then, of course, there's other companies that are on the late adopter side, right, or the mainstream side, which is, hey, we only pick it once it's clear that everyone else is using it and we're being left behind, right? So different businesses, different regions are in different parts of that life cycle.
Yeah, that also makes sense. Plus, you also hear like people saying, I won't touch it till it's 1.0, or I won't touch it till it's 2.0, and if it's 2.0, I won't touch it until it's 2.1 because you still got to take the hinks out of 2. This kind of stuff.
Sure.
And the other question I have too is like when you talk to these enterprise customers, there's been a lot of promise from a lot of people saying that, okay, one code base to rule them all, right? Like, let's not forget, like Java's original thing was write once, run anywhere. It's not always true to a certain extent, right? But like, how can you actually promise that, yeah, it's one code base and everything runs fine? I mean, there has to be a lot of setup and cadence that you have in your code base if you want to support so many different platforms.
So here's what I can tell you is that we do as well as any framework I've yet seen, right? To be clear, as an industry, we've been trying to solve this multi-platform thing for about 30 years, right? And there's been lots of the road behind Flutter is littered with the corpses of technologies that have tried to create the write once, run anywhere kind of technical solution. What I would say is that Flutter is engineered based on the learnings from the past. Flutter has a couple of things that these other technologies didn't have, or one of the things is it is not meant to be a lowest common denominator. It's meant to be the best possible thing it can be on every platform. And the universal safety valve is the fact that you can drop down and write native code in any of the platforms that you want. And then, if you want something for Android and iOS that's different from a native point of view, you write it both in Android and iOS, and then the compiler sorts it out. Oh, you're on Android, we'll give you the Android version. And what we do is we don't try to have one universal binary that targets everything, but rather we let you write your source code, and then you say, I want the Android version, and I want the iOS version, and I want the web version, and we generate the appropriate binary or output for each one of those platforms. And we do it. Dart, the underlying Dart platform, is unique in its ability to provide, a really great developer experience with sub-second hot reload, and it uses just-in-time compilation to be able to provide very fast developer experience. But then when we target the output, right, when we target a release build that is meant to target each platform, that's native code based on the platform. So desktop platforms are x86, and the web is highly optimized JavaScript, and mobile is ARM. So that's the experience you get. Again, one of the benefits is you write your source code in a multi-platform way, and then you get the targeted binaries that have all the stuff in it that you need for that platform. Which is not to say that we expect developers to write their code ignorant of the platform, right? You have to take into account, if you're going to be targeting small screens and large screens, you have to make your app responsive so that it lays out nicely on small screens and large screens, right? We can't hide that from you. That's something that you have to manage. If you want to take advantage of native integrations, for example, there's, as I look at the desktop, there's some really great plugins that allow you to do, cool things with a caption bar and kind of merge your app bar and the caption and provide that functionality in a way that is just like what modern desktop applications do today. You get that control. You have the ability to tailor it as much to the individual platforms as you want, while still leaving the bulk. Could be 100% of your code is shared, could be 80% of your code is shared. But what we find is that people largely write as much code as they can in a shared way, and then they drop down to the native side with plugins or direct native code to do the things that they can't do directly in Dart. But we still find that's mostly a pretty small percentage of the average app.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the main question I have is is there a recommended approach on how I should do a adaptive or responsive type app, right? Because I think adaptive is also another thing you want to take a look at too, right? Because you can hover with your mouse, but you cannot hover with your finger on a mobile device. You can, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like this kind of thing. Like, is there any kind of recommended approach where I can structure my app in this kind of way?
Absolutely. We have about a 3,000 word document up on the website titled Adaptive Apps. How do you build adaptive apps? And it largely delves into three areas of activity. One is, screen size, right? Adapting to that. One is input modes, as you mentioned, right? Mouse, keyboard, touch, how to think about those different kinds of input. And the third is the platform-specific adaptability, right? How do you take advantage of, unique features of every one of the platforms that you're targeting? And at I/O, Kevin Moore gave a talk all about this topic, which is kind of a summary, the high points of that recommendation document. So I would turn you on to both of those resources where we dig into just exactly that question that you just asked.
And I think looking at the Folio app from Gskinner, that one should also be good to take a look at, right? It's basically follows all that perfectly.
Yeah, the Flutter Folio app was built with this in mind to target the 6 platforms of Flutter. The Flock app, also from GSkinner, was built again with this guidance in mind to take advantage of all 6 of those platforms. Those are both excellent samples to dig in, and they're real world, right? We built them to, be small apps, but still real world. They do real things, and you can see how developers on Flutter are solving these real world issues.
I think the one platform that I've had some issues with is definitely web. One of the things that just randomly happens to me is that it just stops hot code reloading. Is this still being looked at by the Flutter team?
Absolutely. We're continuing. I mean, we released the first version of the stable in March. And if you remember, Flutter 1.0 was the first version for Android and iOS in production. And we didn't stop, right? We've been working every day for the last 3 years on improving Android and iOS. Likewise for web, right? We released it into production and we have plenty of customers using it in production, but we haven't stopped. We continue to work on the scrolling. We continue to work on accessibility. We continue to work on performance. We have a roadmap of work we're continuing to do on the web.
Let me ask you this question because, like I said, the thing about the web, right, that I've seen other people complain about, and I also had mentioned just now about the hot code reloading stop working. Like, to me that's kind of a little bit of a blocking issue, but I mean it's not too bad, right? You can just turn it off, turn it back on. But like, what's the criteria for saying that this is production ready, this is not production ready? Because I think even the desktop experience is already pretty good because I've actually used it to deliver some products. So I'm pretty happy with it, but it's still not marked as production ready necessarily, right? So what's like the criteria?
So the criteria is whether you can produce something that has good runtime characteristics for your customers. Not to say that we can't improve those, and we will. And certainly, we also work hard on the end-to-end developer experience for every platform, but that's not to say that there aren't improvements needed, and there certainly are on both sides, for not just web, but across the board for all the platforms.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Okay, that's good. So how do you kind of measure the runtime experience then?
So we have a set of criteria, a set of sample apps that we have a set of customers, and we work with them to make sure that their major criteria, their use cases are solved in a reliable way. And in fact, I would say that, Steve Ballmer was famous for saying developers, and definitely, I was at Microsoft for 8 years. I was in the Microsoft ecosystem for 20 years, and so developers are, that's who I get up every day to make their lives better. That's who I care about. That's the customer I care about. But the Flutter experience doesn't forget customers, right? So I'll say customers. When we ship any platform, it's all about having a set of customers that we know that we've unblocked with this stable release and making sure that they have what they need to be successful and that they're happy with what they have. And so we did the same with web, and we'll do the same with desktop to make sure that they're happy. That's not to say that we've made every single customer happy, because we can never do that. Just to be clear, we'll always be trying, right? But that's a moving target. But our goal is to make sure that we have a set of customers, no matter how small, happy with our release, and then over time with subsequent releases, that group of happy customers gets larger and larger over time.
Yeah, isn't the saying like you can't make everybody happy all the time? You can only make some people happy some of the time, or something like that?
We try to make as many people happy as much as we can, and it's the number of people we're able to make happy is never as large as we'd like.
Yeah,
but we keep trying.
Yeah, I agree. It's really tough to make consumers happy. I face that problem quite a lot. So do my clients. So
sure.
I had one more question for you, but it just totally eluded me. But yeah, I think the next thing is that I want to go back onto like the main topic, right? Is that you specifically created a routing package. I feel like routing is now in a stage where it's like we're another package in terms of like trying to solve a problem, right? Maybe we can kind of roll back, since you have some more insider knowledge and you have access to the kind of knowledge. It's like, what's the deal? Like, why do we have to have Navigator 2.0? Why can't we just use existing Navigator or just add some existing API to it? What actually happened?
A couple of things happened. And by the way, I'll say, it's easy to compare. In fact, it's valid, I think, to compare the navigation and routing space where we are today in Flutter with where we were maybe 2 years ago with state management, which is, nobody was happy with how the state management package works. Everyone had an opinion, and they kept coming out with new ones, and that was very useful. Essentially, what Flutter did was they provided the core base that everyone can build on, but it wasn't full featured. It wasn't easy to use, right? I mean, and so there was a lot left to be desired. And we had this kind of Cambrian explosion of all of these state management providers, and that was good because it got us Bloc, it got us MobX, it got us Provider, right? It got us this set of state management solutions, and then people could vote with their feet, right? They could say, I like this one, I like that one, and different people pick different things, and that's okay for people to have different opinions about the different state management solutions they pick. And it's the Flutter team's job to make sure that we build, a base, a framework on which 1,000 flowers can bloom. And that's what happened in state management. And then things settled down, right? We as a community of Flutter developers, we could look and say, okay, now we get the shape of the problem space, and we know that we've got different solutions, and we know what those different solutions are good for, and we know how to recommend and how to guide people. Now, when it comes to navigation and routing, the Navigation 1 API was nice and simple, but it was not anything like full-featured enough for what people really wanted to do. And by the way, state management, navigation, routing, these are kind of universal problems across any UI framework, right? And so every one of them has to solve it in a way that fits its developer base and its core principles. And so we are going through the necessary evolution of Flutter and the Flutter community and figuring out what Flutter best practices are as a community to get to a place where we can say, okay, we've got a handle on state management. We're pretty sure we know how that works and what the choices are. And now we're going through, I think we're at the tail end of that now with navigation and routing. With Navigation 1, it was a nice simple API, but it was nowhere near full-featured enough. It didn't support deep linking in a multi-platform way. It just wasn't enough. And so people were building various packages that tried to hack features in, and they did so with varying degrees of success and varying degrees of depending on internal implementation details that may or may not change over time. And so the Flutter team took that and looked at new capabilities and came up with Navigation 2. Now, the wonder and beauty of Navigation 2, just stepping back, what Navigation 2 does best is two things. One, pure flexibility, right? You are able to participate in multiple levels of the navigation lifecycle from, hey, here's the name of the location in your app where the user could go. How do you want to represent that as state in your app? And we'll keep that for you for a state restoration point of view, and we'll give it back to you when it comes to, okay, now it's time to build the list of pages. And once you've given us those pages, we'll put the back button automatically on the nav bar, and we'll automatically handle the back button for Android. And when they do press the back button, we'll let you know, and you can do whatever you need to do to update your app state. So it lets you participate in all of those levels. However, the cost of that is complexity, as you know, and we can talk about that in a second. The other thing that Navigation 2 does that's really great is it allows you to handle deep linking in a truly cross-platform way. So if you set up intents, in Android, there's some configuration you have to do in the manifest. But when that URL comes into your app, that was taken from the router and rerouted to your app, when that URL comes into your app, it's the same format as when the URL comes in from iOS and when it comes in from the browser, right? You can just write your navigation code around this core URL format and not have to worry about, am I dealing with deep linking in Android or iOS, the browser or whatever. You can just write your navigation code in a truly multi-platform way. And so I will say, right, navigation and routing is hard enough on any one platform, right? All of them have it. It's all hard. It's, it's always a struggle to get it right. And it always takes multiple iterations to get it right. But then trying to do it in a way that plugs into multiple operating systems underneath, the Flutter engineers, I think, came up with a really great design. Now, of course, with all that flexibility, as I say, comes complexity. And so what happened was, again, very much like state management, we had this explosion of people with their own packages that came around and said, well, I understand all that flexibility. Some of it I really need. Some of it we don't really think we do need to implement the scenarios we care about. So what we're going to do is we're going to build APIs on top. And that's what the custom router packages are that you'll see on PubDev. You'll see things like AutoRoute and Beamer and vRouter and RouteMaster, and the list goes on and on of people that have wrapped this underlying, very flexible, also complex API, which was something simpler for folks to understand, and therefore easier for them to add it to their application.
Can we talk about some of the packages that you guys took a look at? So I think I remember you talked about you guys were looking at the different routers and seeing which one is, I guess it's probably to recommend one, right? To say that this one is one that we think you should use in case you don't have an existing choice. So like you looked at,
sure. I
think Beamer is the most popular one. Like what do you think about Beamer? Or can you talk very particular about what it does good and what you think could do some improvement on?
So we looked at a number of them. And we have a report that we plan on to publish soon. And what I will say is, of the ones we looked at, all of them were great at some stuff and less great at other stuff. And so what we found is none of them is great across the board in a way that we can really say, aha, use this one. We're ready. We've figured it out as a community. This is the one that does, pretty much all the things that you want to do, and it does it in a consistent way with great docs and great samples and easy to understand and easy to use. So we in our studies did not find that routing library. We found that, however, every single one of them, what we looked at, was better than nothing. In fact, way, way better than nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean using the Navigation 2 API kind of in the raw, right, by hand. All of them were better than that.
Okay. What do you think that most of them were kind of lacking? Was it the easy to use part? Because I know when I look at the docs, like I always feel like this is kind of complicated. That's what I usually feel when I take a look at all different routing places. But that makes sense because routing, like you said, is not a very simple concept.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard line to walk. It's one of those software design problems where it's a hard line to walk. The kind of thing you want is something that is super easy to adopt for the common cases, but also supports those advanced cases for when you want to do something special. And of course, Navigation 2 by itself can handle any old thing. But it's really hard to make it do just the basics, right? Whereas we find that a lot of these packages made it possible to do the hard thing in a reasonable way, and some of them were better or worse at the super simple thing, right? So the barrier to entry was not quite as good as we might like, or they were great at these scenarios, and it was more difficult for people to understand for these other kinds of scenarios. And the kinds of scenarios I'm talking about are things like, guards for login, and having a stack of pages, being able to replace the entire stack, being able to push something on top of the stack. Those kinds of common scenarios that people want to implement in their apps.
So if you looked at basically at least all the top ones, and none of them are fitting all the criteria, then what's the plan to solve this kind of problem? Is it that Google's going to step in and try to make some kind of reference implementation, or what do you think?
So at this point in the evolution, we feel like people are converging on what a declarative routing solution should look like, and how to build up the kinds of support for the scenarios that people want. So at this point, it feels like not such a great use of limited Flutter engineering resources to go and build a whole new one up from scratch, but rather to provide feedback to all the router implementations to be able to say, this is the criteria that we're using to look at them. And we did a bunch of user studies, expensive user studies, right? We pay Googlers to sit down and talk to developers and say, hey, try to do this with this library, try to do that with this library. This is not something that your average, package developer can afford to do, right? To pay full-time employees to have these kinds of conversations. So we're going to be sharing that data as a way to help the engineers who are building these packages in the community have some data and go, oh, I see, people are tripping on this or that, right? I can make this easier or that easier. Oh, they need this feature or this other feature. And the goal then would be, over time, the space continues to iterate and we get better and better until, one or a small handful kind of emerge as, as good as we think you can do, right? As good as, any Flutter engineer themselves would do in terms of if they were to build something up. For example, in the state management, if you look at provider, the one that we kind of, if you don't know which one to pick provider, and it'll handle most of your use cases, and it doesn't hamstring you in terms of a specific architecture. On the other hand, we also say, if you would like an architecture imposed by your state management solution, hey, take a look at Bloc. Bloc has a specific way of doing things, and any Bloc developer can pick up your app and immediately know what's going on. It has more ceremony, it has more code in it, but it does point you down a specific path, an architectural path. So, we can make these recommendations in the state management space because we worked with the authors and we gave them feedback and we tried to come up with something, simpler and more full-featured. And we're trying to do the same thing in this space too, where we give the package authors feedback and then they improve until we have a small handful that we can really hold up and say, take a look at these. I think you'll have good experiences with X, Y, and Z.
Oh, that's great. So then you actually reached out proactively and said, hey, here's some feedback for you guys. If maybe you can try this, or this is where is it like you can try this and make this change, or is it that this is where people are getting stuck up on? Can you try to make some improvements?
It's the second one. It's the second one. And you mentioned a report, right? So as part of studying each one of the handful of custom navigators that we studied, the authors all get feedback as participating in that study from a package author point of view. And then, as you say, we have a report that we plan to publish, which is, hey, here's the overall results across the board. And again, that can be for the ones we studied. It can be for anyone building a custom router solution.
When's the report coming up? Because I'd love to see this.
That's an excellent question.
That's what I had the feeling of. Kind of when it's ready, right?
That's right.
Okay. In the meantime, you're giving feedback already to people, or you're waiting to the end and just like publicly giving it out and saying, if you want more information, come out to us.
As I say, the package authors themselves got feedback along the way.
Okay, so they already got feedback already. It's not wait till the end and then they'll find out.
Yeah, in fact, if you look at the beginning of our study and the end of our study, which lasted a couple of months, you can see improvements across the board in most of the packages we studied.
You just see these flurries of releases, right?
That's right.
Oh, I could just imagine like, okay, how about now? And then test the guy again.
Sure.
I think at least I know I've done that before, where it's like I try to fix something for a client, and I'm like, okay, try it now, and no, okay, please work, commit.
For sure.
Okay, that's good to hear. How about for so this kind of goes back to what our topic is like about your Go router, right? So it's interesting that even though you're on the Flutter team, you have some knowledge about what's going on, but even Go router itself is not actually filling all the gaps that the Flutter team's looking at, right? So, like, what made you interested?
What do you think gaps are left in the Go router?
I don't know. I mean, you mentioned that when I'm saying gaps, I'm saying like it's not at a stage where you guys can say, okay, this is the one to use, right? Like, where is it lacking in the studies that you guys did?
Go router was released after we began our studies. It was not part of the studies.
Oh, okay. So then it's never actually been tested. The studies, at least.
That's correct. That's absolutely right. It was not part of the study. And to be fair, I only released it a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm aware it's a brand new package, right? So I'm guessing that you took all the knowledge and feedback from the studies and then kind of applied some of that to the Go router package. Is that right?
Actually, it's interesting. It was a parallel effort. The studies ran about the existing routers, while I spent about 4 months from my first commit to building my own router. So they happened in parallel. Now, of course, I was familiar with the scenarios they were testing, and so I made sure I did the best I could on those scenarios. But I also evenings and weekends, I enjoy writing Dart and Flutter code. So I have real world apps that I build that needed, real navigation and routing, and I care about deep linking, and I wanted to make sure all of that worked well. And I didn't myself, in my own research, find any routing package that met my own, taste, if you will, ones that I wanted to use. And so evenings and weekends, free time, that's when I kind of built up the Go router to make something that I enjoyed using.
So can we talk more about like what was your specific things that you wanted to target to really nail that the other ones just couldn't handle it, but Go router does?
I wouldn't compare Go router to any of them. I picked up several of them myself and ran into one problem or another. Maybe it was docs. Maybe it was the style of the API. Maybe it was the complexity. That kind of made me kind of shy away from them enough that I got frustrated enough that I went to build my own. And really, that's the beauty of building it for myself is I could build it for myself. I could build an API that I wanted to use, and then as I did it, I kind of ended up writing, like a chapter of a book for when it comes to the documentation and samples to show off. If I was going to write some code to do a thing, I wanted to make sure that the README kind of, the documentation told people how to use that thing. Otherwise, why build it, right? Why build in a bunch of secret functionality? So I ended up having, a very large, very comprehensive set of README and a set of samples that showed off kind of all the things that Go router was meant to do. And it turns out people appreciated that. I've gotten plenty of good feedback, positive feedback on the list of capabilities that I covered, the style of the API that I built, and the README itself, the docs.
What was the idea? So it's kind of interesting, right? It is pretty new, but you already have a 2.0, right? Where you have some breaking changes, right? So people came back to you and said, "Oh,
that's right. I had breaking change that made me go from 1.x to 2.x because that's the way Simver works. And I did that on purpose. I wanted people to opt in because they had to update their code. And as it turns out, I got a little clever in my design of the 1.0, and I did a little poll on Twitter, and the world agreed with me that I got a little clever. So I fixed it in 2.0.
By got a little clever, you mean like you were trying to do things that were maybe a little bit too complex?
Yeah, so actually I was trying to make it simpler by having, so the way it worked out was with the Go router, you have two places to pass along parameters. You can pass them as part of the path, like, user /ID /something, right? And the ID is a parameter. It's a variable in the URL. And then that affects routing. And it's exposed to you whenever it's time to build a page based on that data. You're handed, a set of a map, right? A set of name value pairs for ID, and then whatever the value is of the ID in a way that you would expect. But then there's another way to pass parameters that I support in the URL, which is called query parameters, which is $, foo equals bar, blah blah blah, in the way that everyone's familiar with. And instead of maintaining those two as separate, here are the path parameters, here are the query parameters, I jam them together into the same map with the idea that it's just easy to go, map name and then value, and whether they happen to come from the path or whether they happen to come from a query parameter, it doesn't really matter from a programmer point of view. You just want to know what the value is. The limitation, however, and this was rightly pointed out to me, is that now I can't have any overlaps between the two. And while that is generally the case, that you don't want overlaps, remember that the URLs can come from deep links that exist already on the web. And so, the web is a wild and woolly place, and all manner of things could happen. And so, so what I did was I updated the code, and I exposed params and query params so that they're easy to get to either one of them. And it turns out from a programming point of view, you often already know which one has which, so you don't ever have to go, oh, let me check for this value in params. If it's not there, let me check in query params. That's not a thing you ever have to do. You know where the data is going to come from. So it makes things simpler for people to understand, which is important because I have to write the documentation and kind of tell people how things work. It makes it clearer when they read their code. There was just really no downside in trying to pack them together into a single namespace was just me being too clever, and that happens sometimes.
What I sometimes hear about, I don't know if this is a problem with the Navigator or what, is that when I add in guards, the URL on top, it doesn't get changed to the guard URL. If you try to go to a section which you have to be authenticated, but you're not authenticated, I put in the guard to make sure that you are, and you get redirected to log in. But actually, the URL on top doesn't get changed for some reason. I don't know if that's an issue of Navigator or not, because I heard people complaining about this for different packages.
Oh, that Go Router handles that situation properly. And GoRouter has another thing that it does. So, if you come into, /admin and you're not logged in, it will redirect. You can set it up to easily redirect to /login, and the URL will update without any problems. But one of the, so that all works the way you want it to. A couple of things I do for when it comes to guards. One thing I do is you can set it up so that once you've logged in, you can actually, the Go router can automatically recalculate the route and say, oh, you're logged in. You don't need to be on the login page anymore. Let me send you to the page you're supposed to be on. Or vice versa. If you're logged out at any point during your app, it can automatically say, oh, you can't be on the page you're on anymore. You don't have permissions anymore. Let me send you to the login page, right? So it can automatically do that. You just pass it in a listenable object to the constructor for Go router, and then whenever the login state changes, it will rerun all of your redirect code and drop you in the same place automatically, which is kind of nice. And then another thing I do in the examples is I show how to use query parameters to say, oh, I was going on a deep link to /admin, but the user hasn't logged in yet. Where do you stash that data so that after they have logged in, it will send them back to /admin where they were on their way to in the first place? And Go router completely supports that as well.
Oh, you mean where you say go to /admin, you're not logged in, you log in, then it takes you right back to the URL which you were trying to get to.
That's right.
How do you actually handle that then? You must have some kind of temporary storage somewhere, right?
It's actually really simple. I just use the facilities of the Go router to say, if they're on their way to /admin, I'll hit the guard function. It will say, they're not logged in. Let's send them to log in with a query parameter, which is the URL to where they were going in the first place. And then the login page says, okay, log them in. If that works, go. And they've, provided this deep link. Let's just take them there, and off you go.
Yeah, that's not very, well, it's clever, but also not very complicated, right? That's the best part. It makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, the whole point of the Go router is what is the simplest, smallest API that I can give people that does what they want and then gets the hell out of their way. And the way I designed it is, and this is how I've been designing APIs since I've been for my entire career, is I just wrote the code that I wish I could write, and then I just went and implemented that code, right? So I essentially write the samples for Go router. I want to do this, I want to do that. I'm like, well, how would I want that to work as a developer, right? What's the simplest possible thing I can think of as a developer and how I describe that behavior? And then I go and implement it. Right? Okay, great. Now I understand how I want it to work. Now let me go implement the library so it works that way.
Okay. So is there any more future plans to make some bigger changes, or it's pretty set the way it is right now?
So there are a couple of things I'm looking into. Right now, Go router is meant to solve like the 80, 90, 95% case. Including, custom transitions and nested routing and subrouting and the redirection case we just talked about, and async data lookup and all of that. It handles all of that today. But there are some additional, more complicated nesting routing solutions that I want to support. And I'm kind of brainstorming with some members of the community about the best way to not only implement that, but expose that in the Go router API. So again, it matches the principles of Go router, which is what is the smallest, simplest thing I can ask developers to tell me about, the behavior they want, and then Go router can go off and do the right thing.
Yeah, definitely. This is quite cool and pretty straightforward, I think.
It looks like you're reading the Go router documentation. Right now.
Yeah. I was just looking some more at it. What I was kind of curious about is if you support like custom transitions to pages, and you already support that, which is great because people always want to have something a little bit special, right? Which is pretty cool.
That's right, for sure.
For those observable objects, right, they have to be of a certain type. I was trying to see if I could find what that type is.
Listenable. It just has to be listenable, which is the core, the most basic thing in Flutter for notification.
So what kinds of things are actually listenable? I mean, it has to be a stream, right?
No. The easiest possible thing to do, and I showed this in the example on the docs for Go router, is that you extend change notifier. And change notifier is a listenable that actually will automatically manage the subscribers for you for add and remove, so you don't have to write any of that code. All you have to do is when state in your object changes, you just call notify listeners. So essentially, for, like you have a login info, you extend change notifier, and then, you hand that off to the Go router, and the Go router will be a listener, right? But somebody else will handle that. The base class, the change notifier will manage the subscriptions for you. And then, in your login, all you do is, you call the login function, and whatever magic needs to happen for login. Once the login is complete and successful, then the login object just calls, okay, I'm logged in now, notify listeners. And then all of the redirect logic is recalculated, and you're like, oh, I'm on the login page, but I'm already logged in. Let me go somewhere else. And it's just all handled automatically for you.
Yeah, I almost think like, is that maybe too much magic, but at the same time, it's very, very useful, right? You always kind of have this fine balance.
It's meant to be declarative in the way that Flutter is declarative. And in the same way, right, and of course, this is how we build Flutter apps, right? It's reactive, right? Which is, hey, I'm building some UI based on some state. When that state changes, the build will be called again, and I'll rebuild my UI based on whatever the current state is. That's exactly what's going on with the Go router, which is it's declarative in the sense that, hey, this is, the state I'm using to figure out, how to redirect my users. And when that app state changes, I'm going to let the router know, and the router's going to go, okay, well, let me recalculate where we should be based on this new state, and off it goes. It's meant to be very Flutter-like, very reactive in the same way that Flutter is.
Well, I mean, so I tend to use Bloc mostly because, there's quite some complicated things I have to do. So I just find Bloc much easier to use for these kind of things. Like, especially when you listen for streams, it's easy just to admit another event and update your state. But like one of the feedbacks I got from one of my clients when I was kind of teaching them how to use Bloc properly is that, like, you would click a button, the event would go in, and then state would come out. You'd have a listener, which would then trigger something else to happen. And people were kind of like, oh, wait, how can I follow the flow? Because this is getting very complicated, right? So that's why I'm talking about, like, for him, this is a little bit too magical, right? Is that one thing would trigger another.
But here's the thing. In that case, it's less about, navigation or state management and more about where that person is in their journey as a Flutter developer. Because composable, declarative, and reactive, I would argue, are the three pillars that define, what it is to be Flutter, right? That is how the Flutter UI is designed. And so for you to be a comfortable Flutter developer, these are core principles you have to understand. And so just because it's a learning curve, right? If you're not used to that, there's a learning curve there. But it would be a mistake, I think, to try to do it, to work around the fact that somebody might not understand Flutter and try to build the Go router in a way that was not the same model as Flutter. Instead, what I'm trying to do is, once they understand what the core ideas of Flutter are, I'm just going to leverage those ideas, and they'll see you pass in a listenable. Oh, that makes sense. I know how to do that. I've done that 100 times before. So that's what I'm trying to do there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I totally agree. I mean, I think for basically any type of UI, you always have to be reactive, right? Because people are going to be doing different things, and you have to react upon the UI, right? You react upon actions from the UI or events. Okay. Very cool. Is there anything like you wanted to talk more about with the Go router? Or else I think we have a pretty good base, and I think it's actually something I may take a look at. The API seems pretty straightforward, and I like the idea about the listener at the top level, which can redirect you once you get logged out. That's really, really awesome.
One other thing that I will point you to, if you go all the way to the bottom, there's a here's where to report your issues, and I already have a lot of activity there, people giving feedback and asking questions. And above that is a list of samples, and it's about a dozen, here's some samples that show various bits and pieces of the Go router. And just above that is a little debugging section. And what I do is I make a Boolean available from the constructor of the Go router, and you can flip this bit on, and it can help you understand what the Go router knows about the routes that you told it about. And it will show you what it's doing as you go through and do routing. If there's any problems along the way, it'll show the problems right there in the debug output. Of course, you'll also get the exception that you can handle as you choose. So I built that because I wanted to see what the Go router thought and what it was doing as I was building it and debugging it. But I left it in because I now use it all the time when I'm actually building my apps and I'm building up these, non-trivial routing tables. And I want to know, hey, what does Go router think? What did I just tell Go router? Is that what I meant to tell Go router? And is it actually doing things the way that I expect? And it'll do things like say, well, one of the concepts that I'm also pretty pleased with how it turned out in the Go router was named routes. It'll say, I've got a named route. I'm looking at the named route. Here's what I found. Now I'm routing to that named route. When you do redirection, it'll tell you I'm redirecting here, I'm redirecting here, I'm redirecting here. If you get beyond a routing limit, it'll tell you, sorry, I've routed too many times. That looks like an error. I've redirected too many times. Because it'll keep redirecting so that, you can leave around old routes or routes that are from the web, and you can, make them all go to the same place. But that can happen over multiple hops, and that's supported. Or the other thing, when you start doing multiple redirects that it supports, is loops. So if you accidentally say, oh, I'm going from home to login, and the login goes back to home or wherever, right? If you do some kind of a loop, it'll notice that you're in a loop, and it'll say, oh, that's a loop. You've set up the redirection improperly, and it'll print all that out.
Seems like you thought of nearly everything. Quite.
Can I put that on the homepage for Go Router? Hey, it looks like you thought of nearly everything.
You can take it as a quote if you like.
So the other feature I'm really proud of that I really loved how it turned out in Go Router was this idea of named routes. Fundamentally, the core concept of the Go Router is there's a location, and that location ends up as a stack of pages, right? And you can have subroutes and pull various bits and pieces off. I want to go to this page, with this parameter, and this subpage with this parameter, and so on, and build up a whole stack of pages. And that's the fundamental idea. But if you're not careful, you can start throwing in, all of these URL formats into all your code, right? You're suddenly doing, string interpolation with /user $ID /this/that, et cetera. And now you're building all of the URL formats into your code, which, when you inevitably change them over time as you refactor your app, now you got to go and track all this down, or you have to go and put items in the redirect table, and then, things build up over time, cruft builds up over time. So what I do is I have this concept called a named route, and you can take any route in your set of routes and give it a name. And that name is now, you can do an immediate lookup. It's an O of one lookup. I've got the name. What's the format of that URL for that name? And it will fill in all the parameters, and it will tell you, you haven't given me all the parameters. So it's not type safe, right? Essentially, you're just passing in a bunch of strings, but it will tell you, you forgot this parameter or that parameter. So, it can let you know if you made a problem. But the nice thing about it is the way it's structured is none of your code, none of your redirect code, none of your navigation code, none of your code needs to actually ever care about the structure of those URLs. You can just go say, I want to go to this route. Here are the parameters. You figure it out. Or you can just say, I want to redirect to this other named route, and then off it goes. You don't ever have to build, knowledge of what the actual URL strings look like, except for in one place, which is the list of routes itself. So you can do it in one place, and then and then you don't have to care about it in the rest of your app. So I was pretty pleased about how named routing turned out in the Go Router as well.
So you can actually change the routes and still keep the same names, right, in the future.
That's right.
Okay, that's powerful.
You can totally refactor how things are routed in your app whenever you want to. If you keep the names the same and the parameters the same, the rest of your app doesn't care.
Yeah, you just have to be careful about the routes from the outside coming in, right?
Well, and so that's the other thing that is cool about it, is that you can handle any number of routes from the outside via deep linking, and then you can just redirect those to whatever the route is you want, and maintain that table as a set of named routes, and you never have to care. You can just say, I want to, this crazy, URL from the outside, I'm going to, pull out all those parameters, send them to named route 452, and off it goes. And that could be, some other place in your route table, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, this is definitely really cool. I quite like this. I think the only thing, I wish there was a way to integrate that listener with a block, but I guess it's probably something else you could do with that.
Well, listenable is the core observable API in Dart, right? So anything you would build in Bloc, anything you would build in any of these, could easily be mapped to this core concept in Dart and Flutter.
Okay, I'll have to take a look at that one. I'm always so stuck in building apps that I don't really get a chance to dig deep into some of these topics, so it's a good chance for me to take a look at it.
You bet. I really want to hear what your thoughts are when it comes to integrating Go Router with Bloc. Come on over. There's a whole discussion area on the repo. Feel free to drop in what you found out.
Oh,
and it would be really cool to have a Bloc specific sample that I could share with people, so that other people who use Bloc and Go Router together already have a sample of how to do that.
it's my chance to give back.
You bet, for sure. And in 2.5 weeks, I've gotten to like 7 contributors on the project already, and I don't know, more than 100 stuff. I mean, people are very engaged. Surprisingly so, actually. I was surprised at how many people engage so deeply with Go Router so quickly.
Yeah, I'm curious about what brought them to Go Router, right? Is it I don't know. I guess maybe just another solution to try out and see if it works for them, or maybe this one really works for them.
Well, it is interesting. I get a lot of feedback on the docs, and I've noticed that as we're here on this call, that you're spending more and more time scrolling through the docs and saying, this looks pretty cool. I think I might want to try this. So maybe that has something to do with it.
Yeah, I think so. I think, it's like you said, routing is really similar to state management, where there's not really one solution that can cover all different apps, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Actually, I actually have a question, not so related to your Go Router, but more on the state management side. Like, I think there was a time when Flutter said Bloc is the way to go, and then they changed to provider, right? Like, what was the process?
Actually, I was involved with that. Almost one of my first jobs on the team was, hey, what's this? Because I was a Flutter developer before I joined the team, and I came to the team. I'm like, what the hell's the deal with state management? This is just nuts. What is the right thing? And the answer was, we weren't quite sure yet. At the previous I/O, we had kind of given a talk where we listed a bunch of different state management solutions. And the very last one we talked about was Bloc. And so the audience just assumed that, Bloc, because it was the last one in that talk, that must be the one that the Flutter team is recommending. And so a bunch of people dug into Bloc. And then we got a ton of feedback saying, oh my God, I can't believe you recommend Bloc. It's so hard. Bloc is definitely, something that has its place, but it's also very difficult for a new Flutter developer to climb that mountain, right? As you know, Alan. And so it wasn't so much that we recommended Bloc and then changed our mind. It was that we inadvertently recommended Bloc. And then when we actually recommended people to use provider, and we worked with Remy a bunch on usability to make sure it was something. Because we also had something that we were building. We threw that away. We worked with Remy. Remy, had something that was so close. We got it to the next level. And then that's when we started having that. Really, when Provider 1.0 was released by Remy, that's really the first time we recommended any state management solution. But unfortunately, we miscommunicated, and we sent folks down the Bloc road without meaning to.
It's kind of interesting too, because Remy came back with Riverpod now, and I heard talks, but I can't say this is for sure what he said, but I've always heard that like Riverpod is like what Provider should have been, or it's Provider 2.0. Like, is there any thoughts in the Google team about Riverpod versus Provider?
Certainly we've seen Riverpod, and we've definitely seen a lot of folks be pretty happy with it. The state of the docs right now, if you are an advanced Flutter developer and you look at Riverpod and you're like, oh, this is great, it solves all the provider problems, I wouldn't say that right now it's at a place where I would recommend Flutter developers at every level. I think the learning curve is a little high right now. And I don't think that is intrinsic to Riverpod. I think it's just the state of the docs.
Yeah, I think Riverpod is definitely a little bit complicated, because like I had some problems yesterday working on an app that was using Riverpod, and the biggest issue I had was like, how the heck do I read this provider? I just want to like grab this thing and use it, but I don't know how to do it, and I have to get a ref. Where do I get my ref from? It just wasn't very straightforward. I had to go back and read the docs and like figure out how the heck do I do this? It took me a long time to figure it out.
Yeah, I think Riverpod is powerful and has the potential, maybe, to replace Provider in the future. Right now, though, I just don't think it's ready. And of course, that's the beauty. It doesn't matter what I think, right? Everyone in the world can go use Riverpod tomorrow, regardless of what I think, if they find that is what solves their problem. That is the wonder and beauty of enabling an ecosystem to grow, as opposed to trying to say, and with Flutter you do this, and you do this, and you do this, and that's all you do. And we are very much not like that on the Flutter team.
What about your go-to solution, right? Are you using Provider or are you using something else?
I have I go back and forth between Provider and a little homebrew solution that I built, a little lightweight homebrew solution that is very stylized for the way I write code, and I wouldn't recommend it to anyone else. And then when I'm I go back and forth between my little homegrown and Provider. That is the one I use when I don't use my little thing.
Now you got me curious. I'm so curious about your little thing, but maybe someday you'll release it and show people.
It's not better than Provider. It's just simpler based on how I write my apps.
Okay. I do have another question though. I found it kind of curious. So you have the publisher is Sales Brothers. Are you working with your brother or on something?
Actually, it's interesting. So I've had a little consulting company since 1992. I've done a lot of independent consulting. I've written a bunch of books, and that's where the royalties come, et cetera. And that I needed a name for a company in 1992, you couldn't come up with a name then, like now, where you couldn't also acquire the website. And so I brainstormed a bunch, and I finally landed on Sales Brothers. It turns out that the name of the website is not me and my brother, but rather my two sons. I have two sons, and I've actually been squatting on their website for a couple of decades now.
Oh, so you're basically kind of helping them out in the future, so when they're ready to go, they already have a very good SEO and everything else, right?
That's right. I'm trying to build up the value of the website as part of their inheritance.
There you go. So when they can sell that for paying for college, I guess, right?
Well, they're already embarrassingly old, 26 and 27. So I don't know if the website's going to ever be more valuable or enough really for them to care. They have Gmail addresses, to be honest. I'm the only one with the salesbrothers.com email address.
No, that's okay. Cool. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention or talk about? What's going on in the community? I mean, I know we just had a new release of 2.5, which is pretty solid.
Yep. And of course, we have one more release coming before the end of the year. And some really good stuff in it, actually. Some of it is the culmination of work I've had during almost my whole career on the Flutter team. I'm pretty excited about the release at the end of this year. That's what I'll say about that.
No mention about what's coming up. We'll have to wait and see.
Well, to be clear, you can see exactly what's coming up. It's in the repo, right? Help yourself. You can see all the things we're doing.
Oh, yeah. I have to dig through the repo now. I was hoping to get a Cliff Note version from you.
Sure. Well, why spoil the surprise?
Okay, no problem. Other than that, I really thank you for taking the time to come on. I'm happy that you could make time for us so quickly, right? I think I sent you an email, and then within a couple of days, you're already on the show, which is fantastic. So I appreciate you having so much time.
Well, as you might imagine, of course, I'm pretty busy in my role as PM on the Flutter team. That said, I think I mentioned this earlier in the show, right? Developers are my people. Developers are the folks that I most like as customers, that I most resonate with myself, and that, if I have an opportunity to reach out to the developer community, I like to do so. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Alan, and hear your questions, because I know you represent a segment of our developer audience. And so your questions aren't just from you, right? It's from, a cross section of developers. And so it helps me do my job better every time I actually get to talk to real Flutter developers writing real Flutter code.
Yeah, this is true. That's why I'm never afraid to ask a question, because I'm sure there's somebody else out there with the same question as me.
For sure, absolutely. Not just one other person, right? Tens or hundreds or thousands of Flutter developers with the same question. So always happy to help and spend time with developers if I can.
All right. Again, thank you so much for coming on. Maybe we'll have you back again pretty soon to talk about another Flutter release or something of that sort.
Sure. If we wanted to talk, after the year-end release, maybe, and we can talk about some of the details there, I'm happy to come back on the show.
Maybe let's set that up then. Maybe we have you every single time there's a new release, you come on and talk about it. That's also good too.
Well, and it's not just me. I mean, there's lots of great people in the Flutter team. We can spread the love.
Oh, you mean you don't want to you want to share the limelight then? That's good.
Oh yeah, I mean the percentage of the things that I do on the Flutter team compared to what the overall Flutter team does, or what the Flutter community as a whole does. I mean, I'm a teeny tiny part, so it would be unreasonable for me to claim that just me or I had a significant influence. Right? It is a team effort, and the team isn't just the Google engineers. It isn't even just the corporate engineers as we work with Microsoft and Canonical. It's the Flutter community as a whole. I've been involved with a ton of developer communities over the years, and the Dart and Flutter community is second to none. It's just a magical. We're at a magical point in time right now with being able to actually imagine a world where you can write a single program that targets multiple platforms, and this amazing developer community that's making that happen. I'm so proud and happy to be a member. I can't even tell you.
Yeah, I admit too. I think Flutter is the first solution I really feel is really. I don't know if cross-platform is the right word, but multi-platform is probably the better word to use, right?
Yeah, that's right. Because cross-platform, in my mind, kind of implies kind of a minimum common denominator thing, and that's not Flutter at all. Flutter is meant so you can take the maximum advantage on every single platform you target. So I tend to think of it as a multi-platform solution.
Yeah, I think so too. Plus, I think cross-platform has been tainted by previous solutions.
I think so too.
Okay. So again, thanks for coming on, and we can talk more about maybe having you or somebody else coming back on the show.
Absolutely, for sure.